So, if God is love and is constantly reaching out to humanity, wanting us to know just how much we are loved, then why don't we all just experience that love? Why doesn't God just overwhelm us with the sense of his presence, with the knowledge of his love, so that we have no doubt? The problem is not that God holds back from us. The problem is that we hide from God. The problem is not with God, but with us. We hide because of the things in our lives that we know aren't right. I mean, the vast majority of people consider themselves to be good, and we will justify reasons why we may occasionally, or maybe more frequently, do or say bad things. None of us is perfect, and sometimes we don't even live up to our own standards, let alone what we might perceive God's standards to be. There are times when we may hold on to unforgiveness and let our dislike of someone fester. There are times when we might be tempted to gossip about someone or be selfish or thoughtless. There are times when we might say things that wound others. There are times when we might think thoughts that we wouldn't want anyone to know about. And even if we think we've achieved some measure of sainthood in our lives, we all have things in our past which we regret. There are parts of our lives when we fail or have failed to be our best selves. And the Greek word for this is hamartia, which literally means to miss the mark. In English, hamartia is translated as sin. But, and this is really important, this mess in our lives is not what keeps God away from us. God does not condemn people for sin. We are human and fallible, and he knows that. And the Bible shows again and again that God does not reject us because of the mistakes we make. Starting with the story of Adam and Eve, we see God constantly reaching out to people despite the mistakes they make. God walks with Abraham, who makes frequent mistakes. He approaches Moses, who is far from sinless, leads Jacob, who is an outright schemer, works with David despite his failures, and so on. God the Son, Jesus, spent most of his time here on earth with sinners, telling and showing them that contrary to what the religious authorities had taught, they, the sinners, were included in the invitation to life in the kingdom. So sin is not a barrier to God. However, the consequence of sin is shame, and it's shame that makes us hide from God. This, if you like, is the true cause of separation. God can and does always reach out to us, but we hide from him. The story of Adam and Eve is not written as history, but it's written to help us to understand the problems in the relationship between God and humanity. In Genesis 3, it says that they heard the sound of the Lord walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. They hid themselves. But the Lord God called out to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" And Adam replied, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." God knew what they'd done. He knew that they'd broken the rules and messed up, but he still came looking for them, reaching out to them. Adam and Eve hid from him. In Exodus, you have the story of God giving the Israelites the 10 Commandments. And he invites the Israelites to come up to the mountain to be in his presence. He invites them to get themselves all prepared and ready. But when it comes to the big day, they quail away in fear and say, "Moses, no, you go instead." Because they are afraid and they hide from God. John's Gospel says that the light has come into the world, but people loved darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. All those who do evil hate the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. In Colossians, Paul writes, "Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior." We hide from God. And even when we acknowledge Jesus as Lord and come to church, there can be parts of our lives that we still don't fully open up to God. It's a bit like if Jesus was coming to tea and we'd quickly tidied up some of the key rooms and threw all the rubbish in other rooms. So we entertain Jesus in what we think are the acceptable parts of our life, but tend to hide away some of the rubbish. We're afraid to bring that out into the open in case we are rejected. Back to the part of the Tim Keller quote from week 1. To be known and not loved is our deepest fear. So we never truly open up to God because it's too frightening. It's scary to be that vulnerable if God might reject us. And God will never force himself on us because he is love. Just as the Father doesn't chase after the prodigal son all the way to the pigsty and drag him back home again. He knows his son must make his own decision. So the Father watches and waits, hoping that his son will come home again. But what has all this got to do with the death of Jesus on the cross? Well, we'll explore that tomorrow. I hope you can join us.